Afternoon, colleagues. My name is Joanna Madalinska. I work at the University of Warsaw, Poland. I was happy to chair TEPE network for the last 6 years. It was a pleasure for me, and now I have the privilege to chair our session. And as I mentioned just before, we have, according to the program, 3 very interesting presentations, and the first presentation will be held by Davide Parmigiani, and it will be about the analyzing online teaching and learning activities for pupils with special education needs and abilities. And I would like to remind you that we will work in this way, that we will have 20 minutes presentation plus 10 minutes discussion, and then we will move to another presentation. So Davide, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Joanna. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Unfortunately, we are obliged to meet only online. So I do hope that next year we'll be able to meet in person. And first of all, I share my screen. And this is my presentation. And I put, I'm sorry, I don't know how to say, just a second. Okay. I put in the chat the references for this paper. So this, as you can imagine, this research was based on the activities carried out during the first lockdown. And you know that unfortunately Italy was the first country that started the lockdown in February 2020. And we tried to analyze the online teaching and learning activities carried out for specifically pupils with special educational needs and disabilities, because it was an unpredictable situation. So if you want, I put online the link for the paper published on technology, pedagogy and education. It's open access, so you are completely free to click and download it. And what we did, we tried to understand which were the factors that affected the online inclusion. You know that the inclusion is already difficult to be carried out in person with the pupils with disabilities and special educational needs. In particular, in this situation, it was so difficult because there were some additional factors affecting the inclusion. So why the situation it was so difficult? Because in the past, the inclusion was focused on pupils with disabilities staying at home, but the rest of the classroom was at school together with the teachers. So in this situation, we know, unfortunately, everybody, that all learners experienced a sense of isolation. In particular, I don't know in your countries, maybe during the discussion you will be able to explain me, the Italian way for inclusion is to allow all pupils with whatever kind of disabilities or special learning difficulties, all pupils have to be integrated in the regular classrooms. So within an Italian classroom, you can find a regular teacher and a special education teacher. And they have to cooperate together in order to arrange the inclusive activities. So you can imagine this additional problematic because the regular teachers and the special education teachers had to cooperate online. So there were more layers of inclusions. In particular, the research questions was focused on the factors that affected the effectiveness of inclusion during the school closure. In particular, we wanted to analyze the strategies used by the teachers and how the teachers managed the inclusive classes online. Another important factor, which kind of relationship were set up together with the families of the pupils, which kind of collaboration, how I mentioned before, between class and special education teachers, and if the Italian teachers were prepared to set up inclusive online activities. Here you can see the participants, 785 teachers, split in these categories, class and special education teachers, and the school level. I put some notes about the coding process, but we are all researchers, so I don't want to use the time for that. Anyway, the questionnaire was composed of 6 open-ended questions, and we had to analyze so many answers, of course. This is the main finding of the research, this map of the inclusion. You can see in the first level, in the first categories, the factors that affected the inclusion. Starting from the right, teaching, so the teaching strategies, the technologies, so the hardware and the software to be used by the teachers, the relationship with families, and the level of the teacher collaboration. So starting from the first factor, technologies, you can see we could find 3 main codes within this category, and I can change my slides. The equipment availability, the levels of technical competence, and the use of instruments and materials. So first of all, on the left, more or less, unfortunately, you can see on the top on the left, 24% of families did not have devices. So more or less, 1 family out of 4 couldn't connect effectively because they didn't have good devices to carry out video lessons, online activities, and so on. And in addition to that, 16% of families had a low quality internet connectivity. And in particular, in yellow, you can see some sentences written by the teachers. Some families have just 1 smartphone, and you can imagine the difficulties experienced by these families for connecting and for following the classes online. Then the second point at the level of technical competence, and at the bottom you can see the level of technical competence showed by the teachers. So only the 17% of teachers had a high level of technical skills in arranging, preparing materials, sharing data, and so on. But more than 1 teacher out of 2 was not be able to arrange good online activities. And in addition to that, also some families, more or less 1 family out of 10, was not prepared to manage the online activities. Fortunately, many colleagues, in particular the 60% of teachers, created personalized material using different kinds of app. The second factor is the relationship with family. You know that always the relationship with family is fundamental for creating a good learning environment and a good learning relationship for the pupils with disability and special educational needs. In particular, in this situation, it was more important because the families had to manage all activities at home. Fortunately, more or less 66%, so 2 families out of 3 have collaborated in many ways with teachers. Instead, more or less 1/3 of the family did not collaborate with teachers. So you can imagine 1/3 of pupils did not have the possibility to interact with the teachers during the lockdown. In particular, you can see that in yellow, some sentence written by the teachers, inclusion is difficult in cases of economic, social, or linguistic disadvantage. I clearly remember when I met after the lockdown, a young pupil, a friend of my children, coming from Bangladesh, who of course his parents weren't be able to speak Italian, and only with a smartphone had to manage everything. So you can imagine the difficulties for this kind of children. In particular, I would like to underline on the left, the 16% was totally absent. So during the lockdown last school year, we lost the 16% of pupils. I'm afraid that all countries were in a similar situation. The third factor, as I mentioned before, is the teacher collaboration. These 2 terms, push out and pull in, represent 2 terms, 2 fundamental terms. Push out is the phenomenon when there is no cooperation between the regular teacher and the special education teacher. And so you can see that the exclusion, was for more or less 20% of teachers. So more or less 1 out of 5 teachers did not cooperate with the special education teacher. Someone forgot the microphone. No problem. It happens online. And in particular at the upper secondary level, because probably the difficulties in managing, because as everywhere at upper secondary level, there are many regular teachers focused on different subjects, of course, and 1 or 2 special education teachers. So it was more difficult to combine all the timetables, all the schedules, and so on. Anyway, fortunately, more or less the 70% of teachers showed a good level of collaboration. So I was particularly happy, even if this collaboration was focused mainly at kindergarten and primary level, where there is also a structural reason, because the regular teachers have probably 1 or 2 classes to manage for more hours compared to the secondary level, of course. So probably they had the possibility to focus more attention on that situation. And the last factor was, of course, is represented by the teaching strategies. First, the strategies were mainly interactive and cooperative. At the same time, asynchronous and synchronous, and depending on the special need. So, for instance, the teacher, the special education teachers with pupils with severe disabilities were particularly in trouble, like the social worker, maybe also in your country, also the educators working with the pupils with disability after the schools were in trouble because they didn't have any possibility to set up meaningful activities. Anyway, of course, the online activities, the teachers indicated that the main problem was the non-possibility to arrange face-to-face interaction. And the virtual classes, of course, are quite inappropriate because of the short attention of the pupils with disability or special education needs. So in particular, you can see that the asynchronous and the synchronous represented more or less the 50% of the activities. But it was interesting on how the Italian teachers mixed these kinds of activities. And in particular, I would like to show you this last slide because they tried to arrange a kind of path, educational path, starting from personalized asynchronous activities that represented the starting point of the activities, then a moment with the whole class in a synchronous way. Why? Because it was important that the pupils with the disability felt to be part of a group. It was important to feel this kind of emotion, mainly in a condition of isolation. Then synchronous activities in small groups, and it was really interesting to see that the schoolmates can play the roles of tutors with the pupils with disabilities, and then individual activities, always in a synchronous way, to come back to personalized asynchronous activities given to the parents to be carried out after the timetable. And so the families and the teachers restarted this kind of educational path. So it was very interesting on how in an unpredictable situation and in a situation where the teachers were not prepared to arrange, because we know that at university level, it's quite easier to arrange an online activity because we work with adult. So it's more possible to arrange group activities, online tasks, and so on. And in addition, you know, the universities have more financial resources, so they could arrange and buy immediately online situations, online softwares with the possibility to arrange small groups. Instead, you know, at school level, the teachers had only the possibility to have only one room for one classroom. So they couldn't have the possibility to arrange at the same time small groups within the classroom. So there were many factors affecting the inclusion. But at the end, I think that, of course, we all hope that the situation will not present again to our, because we need to re-experience the in-person situation. And in addition to that, the pupils with disabilities have now the possibility to go to schools, even if the school is closed due to the red zone. But anyway, I think that our teachers and our families learned on how to arrange a new learning environment, a kind of hybrid environment, the so-called third space. And in this way, I think that in the future, we will be able to arrange new kinds of inclusion based on this experience. Thank you very much.
Davide, thank you very much, Davide, for the presentation. During your presentation, our colleagues asked about sharing your presentation because they found extremely interesting the graphics that we presented.
Yeah, I can share immediately.
To the chat the email address that you and the other presenters they can use for sending the presentation to the organizers, and then it will be put at the website. So it is the contact address. And now the questions.
I put the link on the chat. If you want, you can download it immediately. We are trying to do it, right?
Great. But I think also that the organizers also would like to have this.
Oh, well, no problems, of course.
But let's just use the time for the discussion. You have in a proper time have the presentation, and now we have 10 minutes. So
I'm here.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question. I've read your paper already. Great paper, by the way, and great presentation as well. My question is, does Italy have specific measures targeting students with disabilities during this online phase? Was anything created by the government?
Not directly. There are some guidelines, not specific for this situation, because you know we have to solve from the beginning the situation. But anyway, there are some guidelines concerning the special education needs, which are represented by pupils with economic, social and cultural, and the last one, the linguistic disadvantage, and the disabilities. There is no strict rules. After the first lockdown, as I mentioned before, the government obliged school to accept all pupils with disabilities also during the lockdown, the second and the third lockdown, because of course the families needed to have a place where their pupil could have the opportunity to interact, to spend some time outside their home, of course. So unfortunately not. I don't think it's possible, because I don't know in your country, to be honest, but as I mentioned at the beginning, all pupils must be integrated in the regular classroom. We don't have any special schools, so there are the usual guidelines for integrating and for accepting the pupils with disabilities. I don't know, to be honest, if there are some specific guidelines for severe disabilities, but to be honest, I don't know.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another comments or reflection? It's the only opportunity that we can ask the author. Alma, please.
Can I maybe just thank you, first of all, thank you very much for this presentation. And as everybody else has already said, very, very nice images that really help us understand the topic as well. My question is, I'm in Bosnia and Herzegovina in Sarajevo, and we still don't have any particular collaboration with special educators or special education institutions. So we still have a pretty much segregated system when it comes to students with disabilities and special needs. So my question for you is, maybe if you could just comment briefly on how that system works in your context. I know that it may not be particularly related to online learning, but I'm just really interested in how that collaboration works, whether there are regulations when it comes to that collaboration with special educators, which is extremely important, as we all know, dealing with inclusion. So maybe if you could comment on that aspect. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, because this is the fundamental question, and it's at European level and a worldwide level. It's a big question, because it's always important to understand if a special education classes or a special school is needed or not, or is it better to integrate pupils in the regular classrooms? So this is a big question. In Italy, the first law was in 1977. So it's a very big history in that case. So since that date, all pupils with disability must be integrated in the regular classroom. So for Italian teachers and Italian families, it's quite normal to go to the regular school, because there is no special schools. But anyway, you're right. The organization is particularly complex, because of course we must arrange, and the question is legitimate. Maybe it's better to have a special schools with special tools and so on for pupils with disabilities. In our experience, but it's just an experience, first of all, of course, it's quite expensive, because we need to have many special educators. In fact, we always need more and more special educators. And the learning environment, of course, is particularly complex, because the regular teacher, the class teacher, and the special education teachers must strictly cooperate. Otherwise, the integration cannot be carried out. For the reason, the push-out phenomenon is a critical point. So, to be honest, the idea of this kind of inclusion, totally inclusion, from a cultural point of view, to me, is the best solution. Of course, from an organizational point of view, from a didactic point of view, it's necessary that also the teachers, and the society in general must grow around this idea. For instance, just before the lockdown, I visited for 1 month in Israel, and Israel has special schools and regular schools. From the law allow families to ask regular classroom to accept a pupil with disability. But in practical, it's difficult, because it's not so usual. So at the end of the day, it's better to send the pupils with disability in the good and beautiful special schools. But the question is crucial. So from my point of view, it's normal to have pupils, and my children had the experiences to have schoolmates also with severe disabilities in the classroom, and they are used to, because they are used to interact with them, of course. Instead, maybe in other countries it's not so usual, but it's true that the educational path for special educators is crucial.
Thank you very much for sharing your experiences.
Thank you, Alma.
Thank you.
Thank you, Davide. So if we don't have another question, I would like to say again, thank you, Davide, for this very important, significant, and inspiring presentation, and for sharing with us the context of Italian school. So I think that we will take this with us. And now we will move to the second presentation, and it will be held by Edvina and Andrea. Still, we focus on special education. And the title of the presentation, we have Distance Teaching of Primary Students with Disability this during COVID-19. You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just gonna share my screen with you as well. Just give me a second. Go. Good, you already said the title. My name is Edvina Bešić, and together with my colleague Andrea Holzinger, I will present you our study. I will just give you a quick introduction to the context of Austria as well, and then Andrea is going to take over with our results. Just in general, which you have already heard by Davide, we know that the COVID-19 pandemic raised the issues of educational justice and equal opportunities for a specific group of students, but here the students with disabilities were mainly excluded from digital education due to all of the issues that Davide already mentioned: lack of infrastructure, lack of preparation of teachers, their digital competencies in general, but then also digital competencies in order to teach students with disabilities in specific. And here I just summarized real quickly for you that we knew that teachers have a need to improve their digital skills even before the COVID-19 pandemic. We also know that some countries, and according to Eurodice, this was around 2/3 of European countries, developed specific frameworks of developing these digital skills, but during the pandemic, and specifically Huber et al. Conducted a study in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, so the German-speaking countries, found out, nevertheless, all of these measures were implemented in these countries. The teachers still suffered from a lack of confidence in using digital technologies in general, because this is not their daily routine, and also they're mainly evaluated themselves as just partly competent. And specifically important for our study is that none of these measures target specifically special education teachers or in general how to teach students with disabilities in a digital environment. And this is very important. And now let me just introduce you real quick the Austrian context. So in Austria, the measures of bringing digitalization into the educational system started already in the early 2000s, and different governments introduced different measures. The newest measure was introduced in September 2019, the so-called Master Plan Digitalization in Education. This master plan touches on 3 areas, meaning software, how to incorporate digital content in the existing curricula, then hardware, how to improve infrastructure of schools, and then the 3rd area is really the teaching of teachers of how to implement digital education. So this is just what was happening before the lockdown. And then the lockdown started in Austria, March 11, all of schools were closed. So in Austria, we have still special educational schools and of course, mainstream schools. So all of the schools were closed, but with the option to open up if parents who were working in critical infrastructural areas, such as the medical sector, could send their kids still to school and to kindergarten. And this was possible in the first lockdown as well. So the schools remain open for these parents. All other students would stay at home. The lockdown ended then in May, and the schools opened with the so-called stage plan. So primary schools were the first one to come back, then secondary first, secondary second, and so on. But the students wouldn't go as a whole class to the school, but the class was split in 2. So you would have the group A and the group B, and they would go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday, and so on. So the students were never back with the same amount of students in a classroom. After the school year finished in June, the ministry introduced us to the so-called 8-step plan. And this 8-step plan was, I would say, an emergency reaction from the government of how to deal with the new situation. This 8-step plan introduced us again to different aspects, such as that we need to provide access to all of the platforms being used with one login, that we need to provide schools with infrastructure, that we need to provide students with laptops, teachers with laptops. And this was specifically targeted at 5th and 6th graders. What is important here is also this MOOC that was developed in August 2020 about digital learning and teaching. And this MOOC was enabled for teachers, so they would learn about how to implement online teaching, how to use platforms, what tools exist, how to cooperate with parents online. Very important is that none of these measures were targeting primary schools, nor were they targeting, again, special educational needs or especially educators. After all of that happened, we had a second and a third lockdown. And while during the first lockdown, there were no specific measures for special schools, in the second and third lockdown, it was specifically stated by the government, the special schools need to remain open. And also that mainstream schools need to target students with disabilities and bring them to the schools to face-to-face interaction, while at the same time, all of the other students would be at home. And as you can imagine, this is a major issue for teachers and a very stressful situation of having both teaching at home and teaching in the classroom. And now we're coming to our study. What was the aim? So similar to the Italian study beforehand, our aim was to gain insights into teachers' perspectives. So how were they including students with disabilities in their digital teaching, and what challenges and opportunities did they identify in general for this group of students? We created an online survey with 19 open-ended questions, including a case description. So besides asking the teachers to describe us in general, challenges, opportunities, we asked them to choose one child or two children and describe us exactly what they did to include these students. We targeted a very specific group of teachers. These are 142 primary school teachers from the federal state we're in, Styria, because we know these teachers personally, we cooperate with them, and they are part of a so-called inclusive education network. So we know that these teachers are very committed to implement inclusive education. We received 47 completely filled out questionnaires, but also a lot of emails with apologies that they can't fill out the questionnaire due to the stress they have, but that the study is very important to them. Out of the 47, 29 were special education teachers, and the rest were general education teachers. And we also conducted an inductive content analysis with codes identified on frequency. And here I will just quickly show you just the main challenges and opportunities. So the main challenges, as Davide stated in Austria, in our case, were really the same. The availability of resources and the infrastructure was an issue, meaning that, as you stated, parents would have one cell phone. Here was the same case. The student really didn't have enough devices. An issue was the accessibility of tools, and Andrea is going to talk about that a little bit more. And also the teachers and parents' commitment or their IT knowledge before the whole pandemic. So we had situations where the parents were very committed, did everything they could, bought new things, bought assistive technologies. But again, we also had situations where this was not possible, and the teachers, students, and parents struggled a lot. And I'm going to touch also on this issue of social isolation. So what Davide mentioned before, the social isolation by our teachers was mentioned when the students went back to school, because we had the case in May, they all returned, but the students who were high-risk students stayed home. So these were the students who were still educating at home while all of their classmates were back in class, so they didn't really have any contact with their classmates, and the teachers perceived that as the biggest challenge of how to deal with that when you have high-risk students at a high risk and they're still at home, but everybody else is in school. And the opportunities you see here, learning motivation because of the use of digital technologies and so on, but Andrea is gonna talk about these a little bit more. And now I'm gonna give my word to Andrea. Andrea?
Thank you. Yes, can you hear me? Yes. Now, Now I would like to present a few key findings from the analysis of the case studies. And on the following slides, you will find citations from teachers about children with different kinds of disabilities. In regard of the ways of communication and learning, it became evident that the most common way of communication was via cell phone. This includes phone calls and the use of messenger service like WhatsApp, followed by email, learning platforms like Padlet, SchoolFox, electronic classbook, or video chats like with Skype, Microsoft Teams, or with WebEx. In addition to digital communication channels, weeklies, key tools, and worksheets were used. Parents mainly picked this up at school or teachers brought them to the pupils. All in all, the descriptions of the case studies reveals a wide variance in the communication channels used during distance learning. The weekly plans provided the students and parents with a daily structure. Here you can read a citation about a child with challenges in its learning behavior. Next slide, please. Okay, the main challenge to overcome during the emergency situation was represented by the loss of contact with the students with special educational needs and the consequent marginalization. This study confirms the studies regarding the importance of keeping the pupils with special educational needs involved through the use of interactive and cooperative teaching strategies that allow the opportunity to maintain strong relationships with schoolmates and teachers and feel that they are part of the community. When the children with special educational needs were included in the digital teaching of the whole class, the teachers reported that their motivation to learn increased. This was also the case with presenting the work to the whole class. And here you can read citations about a child with an overall development delay and of a child with learning disabilities. Cooperation with the family proved to be a crucial factor to enable digital teaching and learning. Teachers reported examples where this succeeded, but also examples where it did not. When cooperation was successful, the students' motivation to learn was high and they increased their independence in using digital tools, but also in organizing the learning. The lack of family collaboration led to the total exclusion of students, especially younger students and those with severe disabilities who could not manage online activities independently. Here you can read citations about a child with an overall development delay. It's a very long citation. Collaboration between classroom and special education teachers is also a factor that strongly influences inclusion, especially for students with profound disabilities. Teacher collaboration was found to be particularly effective when teachers schedules only planning sessions to develop collaborative learning opportunities and find personalized solutions. And here you can read a citation about a child with hearing loss and a cochlear implantat. The accessibility of tools is also very important in an inclusive setting. In many cases, content only becomes accessible through the use of assistive technologies and aids, especially in the area of sensory and physical disabilities. For example, blind students can read text with a braille display, or physical disabled children can operate programs with a special keyboard. These devices are often available at school, but not at home. In school, also the teaching assistants can give support. In the lockdown period, parents without necessarily having the competence, therefore the parents' lack of IT skills could also be a barrier, as the second citation shows. When parents are unable or unwilling to support the child, the teachers were required to provide remote IT support. It is also important to mention that students with special educational needs are also diverse, and teachers reported about intersections with socioeconomic status, meaning that some students only had, for example, a smartphone and not a laptop to work on. We have already heard it today. Yes, here you can read citations about children with William-Boyrin syndrome and with learning disabilities.
Perfect. And I will just quickly summarize what you just heard. For us, it is important to state that the teachers who filled out the questionnaire reported mainly that they reached all of their students in class. So in Austria, we have 5 students with disabilities in a so-called inclusive classroom, and they were able to reach almost all of them. The teachers also stress that parents, teaching assistants, and special education teachers are playing a very important role in providing this technical and learning support in digital education. And for them, it was crucial that students with special educational needs are included in communication and learning pathways with the whole classroom. And this was conducted either via Zoom call, when they would have a morning ritual and greet each other, or present something to the whole class, and so on. But the teachers also stressed that lack of accessibility, which Andrea described, or the lack of, in general, programs being accessible and usable by the students themselves, created a limit to participation for these students, and also influenced their autonomy, because they were constantly dependent on adults to help them install some apps and so on. And very important is that the daily structure was important for the students to learn, and this was stressed specifically for students with autism spectrum disorder, where the teachers stressed that they had to provide weekly plans where everything was written down, when they would reach the students, when they would call the parents, when a meeting would happen, and so on, just to give them a feeling of daily structure. And just to conclude, what is important for us is important that this digital teaching is opening up many possibilities in inclusive education, because a lot of the students are already using assistive technologies, and we have seen that the teachers reported about them being more motivated to learn and more participating when they were using digital tools. But in order for these possibilities to be implemented and to have the effect they should have, we need frameworks. So all of the plans that I told you at the beginning, the master plan for digitalization, the 8-step plan, and so on, they also need to target primary schools. They need to target students with disabilities and also special education teachers in order for them to develop these specific skills in training or continuing training and so on. And at the end, as we have seen, collaboration between different stakeholders is very important. And this raises the question as well, how can we then teach, for example, parents in how to use technology? But this is a wider question, but I think it's a very important question in this area as well. And now we are at the end of our presentation, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Edvina and Andrea. So we have 10 minutes for the discussion. I think that our colleagues, they will have a lot of questions regarding this subject.
Can I speak? Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, hello. My name is Yanit, and I'm also researching this field. And I'm a teacher in kindergarten. And in my class, in every year, there is always the children with the special needs. And every year I see the difficulties that never improve. That's why I'm researching it. In Israel, it's a very new law. It's only 3 years. Only 3 years ago, this inclusion started in Israel. That's why I'm very anxious to research and study this field. My question is, how do you think that technology that we have right now can improve the abilities and to also help the children with the difficulties, the disabled children, but also help the other children? Because I feel in my class, especially in my class, that the other children, the regular children, sometimes lose because all the attention go to the child with the special needs.
Thank you for this question. This is a very big question, but let me just try to give you a short answer to this. So in Austria, we have implemented inclusive education since a long time, but we still have special educational schools. And we are mainly working with inclusive education classrooms where you have students with disabilities, a variety of special educational needs, and students without the disabilities. In regard to digital tools, most of the students are already using assistive technology in order to be able to participate during the classroom. For example, if the student is blind, they have their laptop with them all the time and so on. So these students during this lockdown phase were kind of in an advantage, I would even say, in regards to the other students, because they had to use this before anyways. So this was very interesting for us to see as well. And in regard to your question that students who do not have disabilities are failing in class or are not being considered, I would not concur with that. In our case, we know that our students are developing good academic skills, but it also depends on the way didactics are used in the classroom. So in our classrooms, we mainly implement cooperative learning. It is also important that the classroom teacher and the special education teacher, we have two in the classroom as well, are cooperating with each other, that they also perceive their class as one class and not I'm responsible for these children, I'm responsible for the other children, but that they really cooperate and that the students perceive them as well as their teachers. So we know from our classrooms that the students would ask the special education teacher to help them as well, and they would go and help them because we have also realized that the students don't need the help all the time. although they have it, but that the teachers have to, in these situations, kind of react flexibly and not really divide the classroom in my students, your students, but really cooperate with each other. And we have seen that works really good. And we have seen it also in language learning or math, that the students really support each other within peer learning. But this is definitely something that needs to be trained with the students and also with the teachers. This is not something that comes overnight. It is something that needs to be developed over time. And I think Davide mentioned it at the beginning as well. It is also think of attitude as well. Are you open towards inclusive education, or are you not? And we see that teachers who have experienced it and have students with disabilities in their classroom, they're really positive towards it and believe in its success, and everybody is learning something from each other.
Thank you very much, Edvina. Do we have another question? So may I have a question about the challenges towards teacher education regarding inclusive education in your country? What are the biggest challenges for teacher education? What do you see?
So in Austria, since 2015, we have a new teacher education curriculum, meaning that we are not educating special educators as a separate group anymore, but we are educating regular teachers, if you may call them this way, with the possibility for them to additionally enroll inclusive education. So the students all have the possibility to gain knowledge within the field of inclusive education about different types of disabilities, different teaching methods, and so on. I think in the teacher's education, what the main challenge is right now is really this type of digitalization, because in Austria, this is an exception. So you have exceptional teachers, exceptional classes where digital education is implemented from the early 2000s, and then the rest, like nothing is there. Nobody's using technology at all. And this is something I think that hit our country very hard, and specifically also in the primary school sector, because we were definitely not prepared. And this is the new challenge that we need to face. We need really to focus on educating teachers, because this is the future in how to use digital technology within the classroom, also in presence, to create different learning formats. I think this is our biggest challenge that we face right now.
Thank you so much. In Poland, our teachers who work within the sector of special education, however, also the teachers where we have the inclusive schools. So for everyone, because we have the mixed system, they notice that there are new challenges, because especially when they work with children with disabilities or with the psychological problems, children, they react in a very nervous way. So it was not only about the digital education and the use of application, but also completely new problems, questions arise during this time. So now we try to offer teachers special courses, how to cope with this new children reaction, attitudes towards this, because simply sometimes they didn't understand why teacher is on the other side and why teacher use the computer, why they are not able to be in the classroom. So it was a challenge for teachers to cope with the situation. Thank you so much. Maybe we have a reflection. Still, we have 2 minutes. So we have different countries, different contexts, different solutions, because Davide present us Italy, where we don't have even the area for the special education. By definition, it is inclusive education. And for me, it's the question about the teacher's assistant. How do they work at the school? And also the number of pupils at the classroom. It's also interesting. Well, so thank you a lot, Edvina and Andrea for this inspiring presentation. As I mentioned, if you would be able to share with us your presentation, we'll be very happy about this. So thank you. And now we will move to our last paper at this session, Equal Opportunities for All Students.
Yes, just a second so I can share the screen. I hope you see my presentation now.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So hello also from my side. I'm Karmen Javornik, and today I will briefly present the main findings from the research we did together with Associate Professor Marija Kavkler and Assistant Professor Milena Košak Babuder. Both of them are also here with us today. We are all from the Faculty of Education, University of Ljubljana, so from Slovenia. The topic I would like to present to you is actually quite close to those we just listened to, and it's entitled, as you heard before, Equal Opportunities for All Students. So I won't spend a lot of time here since we already discussed this in previous presentations, but as we know, the transitions to distance education was initially maybe an interesting innovation for primary and secondary school students, at least for some of them. But as school closure continued, they experienced increasing hardships that may have long-term consequences. Our research relates to the spring phase of distance teaching and learning in 2020. This was particularly challenging for teachers, students, parents, and everyone else actually involved because it meant a completely different new way of teaching and learning for us. This was stressful, of course, for many involved, and particularly challenging for students with severe specific learning difficulties. Actually, we said that it is useful to have this kind of data on the distance learning experience, and given the assumption of distance learning in the fall, the data was particularly valuable actually. Their suffering was actually compounded by problems with learning, accessibility and quality of information, and communication technology, and socio-emotional issues, of course. In order to reduce impact of distance learning on all students, especially those with specific learning difficulties, we find it crucial to hear the opinion of students. So our research focused on students actually. So maybe for the start, just to better understand who we are talking about, let's take a quick look at the criteria for defining severe specific learning difficulties in Slovenia. There are 5 criteria, and in order to identify a child or a person as having severe specific learning difficulties, it is necessary that all of the following 5 criteria are described. First is discrepancy between general intellectual ability and school performance. Then further, we have academic skills that are substantially below what is expected for the student's age and cause problems in school, work, or other activities. They also experience poorer learning efficiency due to deficits and/or impaired cognitive and metacognitive learning strategies, ability to organize and structure learning demands, and/or speed of processing. Next, there is proven disorder of one or more psychological processes. And finally, specific learning difficulties are not due to other conditions like intellectual disability, vision, hearing problems, and so on. So just in short about this. In Slovenia, we use 5-step model to support and treat students with specific educational needs. As you can see, it is presented here under 2 aspects, as a continuum of special educational needs, here on left part, and a continuum of support actually by school or other institutions. The first, like most basic step, is universal assistance and support, which means actually good instructional practice. This level is sufficient for about 80% of students, and if a certain step is perceived like as insufficient, the following is of course done. And the second step is support of school counseling service. The third, targeted assistance and support. And the fourth is assessment and support of professional in external institutions. Oops. If the fourth step is not sufficient, the student will be referred to the 5th step, which includes individualized, specialized assistance and support, or special schools. We have both like special schools and support in main schools, of course. This is carried out for students who have severe specific learning difficulties also. Just in short, I would like to show you some data for this and last school year. So in the table shows that number of students by each specific educational needs group in primary school. We can see that the group of students with severe specific learning difficulties or disabilities is actually the most numerous, and it is also important to know that some students with severe specific learning difficulties may also belong to the group of children with multiple disabilities. So this part. And similar is in secondary school. So here the percentage of students with severe specific learning difficulties stands out even more. The impact of distance learning has been researched by various authors, of course. They found that there were many effects on school-age youth. Academic performance declined because distance learning students spent less time studying than in class and experienced more stress and anxiety, which negatively affected academic performance, of course. Lacking face-to-face contact with peers and teachers, they were less motivated and engaged in fulfilling their school responsibilities. The lack of social contact with peers and teachers could have actually far-reaching socio-emotional consequences on individuals' behavior and mental health of course, individuals. A study of the performance of 8,000 3rd to 8th grade students in 2019 and the spring period of the 2020 pandemic found that distance learning had a much greater negative impact on math achievement than reading achievement, actually. It's predicted that the reading achievement was better because students read more independently and also had an easier time getting help from, for example, their parents or siblings than those who had difficulties with math. For youth ages 13 to 18, it's recommended that screens are used for no more than 2 hours per day in their free time. However, it was found that Slovenian students spent an average of 6.7 hours per day in front of screens during the epidemic or pandemic, of which 3.8 8 hours were related to schoolwork, which is quite a lot. Hours before screens, of course. And now our research. Our research is actually part of wider study. And the aim was actually, after distance learning in the spring, we asked Slovenian students with severe specific learning difficulties about how the COVID-19 pandemic changed their lives and affected their plans. We were interested in how lonely they felt, how stressful this period was for them, and what their learning needs were, and how the home and school environment met their needs. The following research questions were formed. You can see them here, and we will discuss this a little bit later on. 60 students participated in the study. 32 of them were male and 28 were female. And there were students from primary school, from 12 to 14 years old, and students from secondary school. We asked them about their difficulties identified through a formal diagnostic procedure. Where students could choose more answers, of course. We can see that the most difficulties are with reading and with attention, but there are not like big differences between groups. Data were collected using online questionnaire. There were questions about, of course, basic information, open-ended question and close-ended questions with multiple choices. And there were questions related to consequences of the pandemic in the emotional, social, educational, financial domains with a 4-point scale. Students with severe learning difficulties were invited to complete the questionnaire via parents and professionals involved in Bravo Association. This is a Slovenian association for helping children and adolescents with specific learning difficulties. The questionnaire was assessed via web link, of course, and students have completed the questionnaire from September the 1st to November the 1st, 2020. And of course, it was voluntary and anonymous. I will now present just like a more significant result. As mentioned earlier, we were interested in differences between the experience of the consequences of the pandemic by level of schooling, so primary or secondary, and gender. And we can see that primary school students and male students had statistically more parental help. Also, male students said statistically significantly more than female that their parents always helped them when needed. It is actually expected that younger students need more parental help in general, of course. It is interesting that differences in this topic are so significant between boys and girls, actually. And of course, it increases the differences between students in terms of how much support and help they can receive from family members. We can see also that secondary school students had statistically significantly more problems with the transition to distance learning and with different ways of working. And they also had more problems with organizing their learning. Both of these could be explained by the fact that teachers and parents of secondary school students actually expect more independence from students. And this is not an easy task for many students. This could also be related to the fact that it was less likely for them, for secondary school students, to get additional professional help. And secondary school students also spent a lot of time, more time alone in their rooms, playing games, chatting on social networks and so on. This actually may be related to how lonely they felt, how stressful this time was for them, and how much they missed spending time with friends face to face, not just using social networks. And so this and the next question were open-ended. So we divided their answers into categories. As you can see, students in most cases describe that it helps them to be good at organization of notes and materials. This included extracts from notebook or textbook, different kind of cards, underlining key information, color coding, taking notes during class all the time. Slightly less than 50% described that learning while taking talk with someone about the topic really helped them. This category included repeating content out loud, explaining it to another person, asking someone to ask him questions about the topic, listening to audiobooks or videos. In the spring of 2000, it was especially hard for those students to adapt to distance learning. Of course, other categories are also important and can be used as basic guidelines for how to learn efficiently. But these were the main points connected with this question. And then we asked students what help from teachers do they benefit from during the pandemic or in general. And the majority of students described clear, concrete, additional explanation and instructions. This is actually a very important point for us. In detail, they say that they need additional explanation, different kind of explanation, like with drawing, more detailed, with more practical examples, or simplified. They like if teacher puts the content in a bigger picture, if he shows how to solve the task, like with steps or something like that. He helps with concrete short instructions, or they like if he clearly states what he wants from the students, especially during the pandemic when with distance teaching and learning. Of course, this is crucial in general, but considering specific of distance teaching, those dimensions play even bigger role. It probably doesn't come so natural in distance teaching, at least some of those things. Again, the students find it important to have assistance in organizing notes and materials. Finally, we were interested in what the students want for the next school year. And both questions related to that were close-ended, of course, with multiple choices allowed. That's why percentage is like this. As you can see, students miss peers. They want to pay more attention to learning. It is also interesting that they really want to be more independent. Their results show quite a responsible way of thinking, actually, for the future. And for the end, in school environment, the teacher contributes by considering the student's voice, communicating regularly with students, adapting instruction, removing barriers, paying attention to a culture of belonging and well-being, of course, and working with parents and external institutions to organize comprehensive treatment for all. Actually, we think that to ensure equal opportunities, it is necessary to change the way of teaching, which is achieved by training teachers to implement, of course, inclusive education. thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So again, we have the time for the discussion. If there are any questions, you are welcome. Karmen is waiting for sure for the questions.
Actually, the topic is quite similar to the others, so maybe it was already discussed.
Maybe, but you know, first we look at the, here we put in our center children and how to work with them. Yes, so it's another angle to think about this remote teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add something?
Yeah, please, Alma.
Thank you very much, Karmen, for this lovely presentation, very interesting topic, of course, and very related to what we just talked about as well. I find it interesting that you mentioned this gender-related component as well, in the sense of how girls and boys and this gender-specific issue, how it's being dealt with, but also how they feel about it in their context. Maybe a question that I would have, or a comment, more of a comment, is when it comes to gender as such, and these issues, particularly in online education as well, but general education too, is there anything being done on a system level to deal with issues related of inclusive education in terms of gender as well? Because we tend to forget that. In my context, when you say inclusive education, it's, well, children with severe disabilities. That's what everybody thinks of immediately. And you tend to forget everybody else. But obviously, these gender issues are quite an important point in inclusive education as well. So is there something that has been done maybe in Slovenia with regard to that? I would love to hear maybe even just your opinion based on your research. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's like quite similar to other countries. So in recent years, we talk more and more about how important topic this is, and something in this way was done, like to also to talk about this thing and to see this as maybe an issue in some cases, but I think there are a lot of opportunities in this field to improve inclusion in this way also. No?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Do we have another comment? Karmen, can you tell us, do you have any statistics how many children are beyond the education? Because from the national point of view, we can create great opportunities for this remote education, but also we can observe in the world that even in the well-developed countries, because of the remote education, we can recognize new syndrome that children are beyond the system. It means they don't participate in education.
I don't actually have like specific data, but we are talking a lot about this in last few months. Maybe, I don't know, Milena, do you have some specific data on this topic?
Actually, no, but from that reason, we involved our students from the second level of our special education program to deal with the students with severe specific learning difficulties in the secondary school. because they were really very lost when they start participating in the first year of the secondary school. They didn't know how to cope with demands of the new program. So these transition issues were very big. And we find out that actually the support of our students of the 5th year of the special education was really very necessary for them. And they were really very grateful. So we are just talking about the students with severe specific learning difficulties, with this one, which they have the commission of, so official diagnosed severe problems. So they also need profound different kind of support in the school, and there was lack of it in the start of the schooling in the secondary level.
Thank you, Milena, a lot. And regarding the theme of our conference, let us think together, what is the biggest challenge for teacher education regarding remote education in Slovenia? Can we define somehow the biggest challenge?
I think we have a lot of devices, you know, but maybe our teacher, they are not so equipped with the knowledge how to work in this distant teaching. But I have to say that the Ministry of Education, they give them some opportunity and give them a lot of choices of the training during the summer, that they were more prepared on this situation in the autumn when the second pandemic situation and lockdown was there. So there is a big difference how they work in the spring, in how they manage this distant learning in the spring, and how they managed it in the autumn and during the winter. So I think that they need more and more knowledge how to work, how to use a different kind of teaching, not just give them some task on computer, but also involved a different kind of teaching methods on web. So yes, but I think the situation was improving during the second lockdown and second pandemic situation.
May I ask something else? This morning I attended the session and it was about, one of the presentation was about teacher well-being. And I have the reflection that, you know, we can recognize different waves of COVID pandemic in Poland. It is like the third one. And of course, our teachers are also better equipped with the different facilities. But what we notice, it's like the main issue now is not only children motivation, because we were talking about equal opportunities for all students. So it's also the issue how to motivate each child at the school. But we notice the same issue in connection with teachers, because they feel that they are tired with the whole situation. So we can recognize higher digital competences of the teachers. They feel more brave regarding remote education. However, there is the issue about the emotion, about the energy for teaching, about the satisfaction. So it's, I think, a crucial issue for teacher education as well, how to manage, how to cope with the critical situation. So it's my reflection about this, how to maintain our high, our passion to hold the process, the passion for teaching. Sorry. So we are really close to finish the session. Thank you very much, colleagues from Slovenia, for this presentation. And I'm so surprised that we did so well. We are exactly in time when we think about finishing this session. So now we have 15 minutes break, and if you have power, energy, I invite you on behalf of the TEPE conference organizers to join next session in 15 minutes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.